This is ACC Nation with Will Ogenin and Jim Quist, featuring ACC sports news and interviews. Available on streaming radio, podcast, and YouTube. Welcome to ACC Nation. That's Will Ogenin. I'm Jim Quist, and our special guest is the publisher of CollegeHoopsWatch.com and the podcast host of Marching to Madness. And if you're looking for college basketball, there's just one place you need to go, and that's Marching to Madness, because Ken Cross is our guest. And Ken, you talk to everybody across the United States. When it comes to basketball, you're on top of it. That's why they call you Kenny Buckets, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you having me back on here, by the way. I started this about 7 years ago with Blake Lovell, who is a radio guy or a sports media person in Nashville. Mm-hmm. And we just, took off asking people, hey, you want to come on and talk some hoops? And, I've been told by more than one person when they hear me speak, they don't forget me, and it's not a threatening voice. So, it may be good. I don't know. It may be good for something like this, but I've done it all the way across the game. I mean, there's 32 conferences. What's going on in the 32nd conference, to me, is important and needs to be talked about, just like, the Big 12 or the SEC. And that's what I'm doing.
Hey, Ken, where were you? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up about an hour west of Virginia Tech. There's a town called Wytheville out there.
Wiffle, not Wiffle.
Yeah, Wiffle, like wiffle ball. We used to play wiffle ball. In fact, we'd play one-on-one, my brother and I.
I was going to say I would never know by the accent that you've carried with you. Of course, you picked up a little bit of that down in the Carolinas too. So
yeah, I moved into Wilkesboro, that area, and I met my wife there. And of course, we're not together anymore, but I met her there, and I coached basketball in that area for 2 years, and I think my record was 1-40 or something like it.
Ooh.
Those kids, I mean, they don't want to play. They don't want to do anything in a lot of those mountain areas where you need to make a commitment to it and do it all year round.
Yeah.
And that's what I ran into. And of course, I didn't know it back then. I was in my 20s. I really wish we would have had the internet, the use of the computer, Wi-Fi like we do now. I could have totally gotten somewhere, because the people I've met, just doing this podcast and stuff, it's insurmountable. It's so much fun. And I think they enjoy having me to talk to. It's like, okay, he's not going to ask, X amount of things about this kid or something, so.
Never know what may be coming next.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about. So
yeah.
Hey, let's talk about NCAA basketball, because as you were talking before we got started, you were catching up with the Gamecocks. The ladies are playing, and this has been a phenomenal season in a lot of ways, but also a very surprising season. Let's start off with what, across the board, what has been the most surprising thing to you about college basketball this season that you just did not expect?
I think it's the depth inside the game. I think you're misrepresenting college basketball when you try to say, okay, there's Power 5 conferences. Because if you define that Power 5 right now, 3 of these Final Four teams are not in a Power 5 conference. The Big East is not considered a Power 5 conference. They'll say the Power 5 and the Big East or something like it, And of course, Florida Atlantic's from Conference USA. Conference USA's had an awesome season. They've got two teams, North Texas and UAB, in the NIT Final Four, and Charlotte won the CBI championship. And then here you've got Florida Atlantic in the Final Four. And then San Diego State's in the Mountain West. The Mountain West is, it's a top 5 conference. It's one of the best in basketball this year. They had 4 NCAA bids last season. They had 4 this season. And San Diego State, they're a defensive style team, but they have tremendous athletes, and they turn that defense into offense, and they average in the 70s. So, you've got those 3 teams, and of course Miami's in the ACC, and it's great to see my pal Jim Larinaga up and running, so to speak, in the Final Four.
That's a really nice place for them to be right now. And gee whiz, all these years I've been told that Miami is a football school, and here we go. It's a basketball school too. So, Ken, among these 4 teams that are left on the men's side, what do you see as the primary strength that each one of them brings that may get them to that title game?
I think the diversification of offenses, because if you look at Miami, I mean, you got 8 or 9 players right there, and any of them can be the cornerstone of your offense at any night. I like the way Norchad Omier plays. He's 6'7", 240. He came over from Arkansas State. He's a scorer and a rebounder. He's also a jump shooter. He can knock it down from 15 to 18 feet. So what that tells me is you better be ready for him to pass, and you better be looking below. You better be looking low on the boxes or whatever kind of cuts that Miami may decide to take at the basket with Omier out of there, because you're going to have a lot of one-on-one matchups with guards in there. And I mean, Miami's guards are awesome as well. With Isaiah Wong, the ACC Player of the Year. And then, you got a lot of kids there, Bensley Joseph, Nigel Pack, that are strong, and then Jordan Miller for Miami. And then you look at Florida Atlantic, that's a 3-point field goal team, at its best. They have 7 players who have from 26 to 68 made 3-pointers a game. They have a really good post game as well. And Dusty May has, he came over from Florida where it was Mike White's assistant, and he's done a great job here building this program, because truthfully, I think they'd had one NCAA bid in the time they've been a Division I school, and I can't remember what league they were in. And then, of course, you got Connecticut. You got Hawkins on that guard. He's a great 3-point shooter. You got Adamo Sanogo, who comes in, to the middle. And then that kid Klingman is good in there as well. And, of course, after Connecticut, you would certainly look at San Diego State, because I think Trammell is one of the best 3-ball shooters in the country. And they have depth at guard, as all these teams do. So I think the offensive side of the ball for all of them, and how they go about, proliferating their offense is a key.
I think the thing that really fascinates me about this Final Four is, especially in the case of the non-UConn teams, is what they went through to get there. And I'm just going to start with San Diego State, because remember when the seedings came out, they were a classic 5 seed that was predicted to get upset by a 12. They did get pushed by Charleston, but ultimately won. When they get to the Sweet 16, decided underdog against Alabama. Excellent defensive game. Same with Creighton. And then obviously Florida Atlantic was down with 5 seconds left against Memphis. then got pushed by Fairleigh Dickinson and against the 16th seed, and just kept riding the wave and just playing fantastic basketball all the way in. And in Miami, another team that a lot of people thought were another 5-12 upset. And even going into the Elite Eight game, they were down double digits against Texas. And I think it's just a classic case of a big year in this year. You never know what you're going to get out of this tournament. That's why it's just so much fun.
Yeah, I was like a guy on the radio today. I'm thinking, the fans or whomever watches this ought to pay attention to the actual 6 months of the season instead of the last 3 weeks, because we got good stuff going on opening night. If you ever look at the schedules have games every night that, pull on top teams from each conference before the conference conference season comes out. They're playing each other, and KenBom.com will note, which games, are the biggest games in that area or whatever that night. So yeah, it's every year. This seems like it gets more interesting. You become more engrossed in it. See, because you got 3 teams here: Miami, Florida Atlantic, and San Diego State, that have never been to a Final Four.
Yeah, so follow me here for a moment, Ken, because I will watch the tournament all the way through, no matter what. I don't care what school's in it. I always hear, oh no, there's no blue bloods in this. Why should I watch?
Yeah.
If you're gonna, the only way to do this is following these kids and following these schools, because you gotta, if you don't, then you're really missing out.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I went down to Orlando, and covered those. My whole idea was, okay, Duke and Virginia are going to be set up in Greensboro. I want to see some SEC teams, which I missed covering the SEC this year because I was injured in an accident. And then I thought Houston might be there because of the Cougars being in the same conference as UCF. And then I was almost certain Miami would be there and not in Albany, New York. But none of that happened. And it's funny how all that works, because the first 2 games of the tournament have almost always been in Greensboro, Charlotte, or Raleigh, and it's almost always felt like 2 home games for Virginia, North Carolina, or Duke.
So let's rewind to the first round real quick. We saw a little bit of repeat history. We saw our second 16 seed to beat a 1 seed in Fairleigh Dickinson beating Purdue. Mm-hmm. Did that still kind of resonate with you in the same way when UMBC beat Virginia?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think so. Although I thought Purdue was a team that could lose. I didn't expect them to lose, obviously, to a 16 seed, but I thought playing Memphis or Florida Atlantic would be a problem for them, just based on they've got a huge lack of athleticism when they match up, and they look at those 2 teams. So I don't know that it had as much of a resonation, because I think the first time that happens, I think it's more decorated, or it's more hard to believe than the second time.
So let's say you get to manage Purdue's roster next season after this. Do you just try to just stop, maybe go into the portal and find some athletes? Is that going to fix everything that they need?
And you gotta figure them in at positions as well. I mean, if you've got players that have been solid, and they're coming back there, if they were solid starters, or they were part of your 8-man or 9-man rotation, you're not gonna alleviate those guys. I mean, that's something you can get recruited with in a hurry. But I think the Big Ten in general needs an overhaul of athletes, not only in basketball, but football. I mean, the Big Ten's hard to watch.
Don't hear that out of anybody in the Big Ten.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not even going to go there. Ken, I'm just 100% positive that you do brackets every year.
Mhm.
So how many have you busted so far?
Well, I had Alabama on one, I had Houston on the other, and then the third one I had Bruce Pearl's one of my good friends. I had Auburn winning it, and the one with Auburn on it's actually it's close to being ahead of the other two. It's only like 20 or 30 points behind it.
It's amazing. Amazing. Yeah. I will say Will has got I think he's still, aren't you still going with a couple of your brackets, Will?
Yeah, I have UConn winning, so I'm in really good shape.
Good. Yeah.
I was a smart guy. I didn't do any brackets at all this year. You know what? And I feel so much better for it.
Yeah.
I don't have to watch in misery as each one gets peeled off.
Mhm.
Something that has come up just recently, a discussion, at least that's emanated from the ACC through Jim Phillips, talking about how only 5 teams were afforded bids out of the ACC, and that maybe that the conference needs to take a closer look at how things are done, and maybe change how things are done within the conference, and maybe even talk to the selection committee overall. That kind of blew up with Joe Lunardi out of ESPN making some comments that weren't taken too lightly by a lot of people. Let me ask you, we were just talking here a couple of minutes ago about how important it is to watch basketball from start to finish. The games that start in November. Now, to me, November through December, that's tune-up time for me. But it does affect the rankings. And my question for you is, do you think they ought to throw out that November through December? No. Okay.
No.
All right. Go ahead. I'll
Why
let
are
you
you
take that ball
playing
and roll
it?
with it.
Why are you playing it then? It means something. And you get these matchups. Let's talk across the country, not just, in one or two places. You start looking at who plays in the matchups in these early games. I mean, across the boards, there's no reason to have a season if you're going to throw out the early matchups. There's no reason to have a season if you're only going to look at certain games in certain conferences. The whole schedule is made for a reason, and that's what it is. Now, some people may play a tougher schedule than others. Well, that's something that comes into play, and it usually does. But to just have November and December and not that's not good. Not even pay attention
That
to
rubs you the wrong way.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, why play the games?
I just thought I would bring it up just to to see how much I could stir the pot.
Otherwise, Clemson would have made the tournament if you just ignore November and December.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, and it's not part of who they were.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think that one of the things I've always enjoyed is the fact that when Coach K was there, it typically had some really powerhouse matchups very early on in the season, and I think that actually helped them in the long term. It challenged the team, helped them to find out what their weaknesses and strengths were, but it also, the more quadrant one teams that you're playing, like you said, Duke and Kentucky, is going to even if you lose that game, it's still going to do something positive for you when selection committee time comes, and everybody always scratches their head. Well, how did Duke get that high of seeding? They didn't do as well this, that, and the other thing. Well, it's because just what you pointed out, Ken, those games at November through December, they're kind of front loading in some cases. They're not playing a bunch of cupcakes. So it's a big difference. You talk to a lot of guys, a lot of coaches. And out of all the people that you have talked to, and I may put you on the spot here, but out of all these coaches that you've talked to over the years, name a few that really stand out to you, and the reasons they stood out in your conversation with them.
Well, you're going to start with with guys like Bruce Pearl, Eric Musselman of Auburn and Arkansas, and then I'm going to take it across to the ACC, where I've had Leonard Hamilton own lots. I've had Jim Larinaga own lots. People at Josh Pastner. I really hated to see Josh Pastner lose that Georgia Tech job. I mean, that's a situation there where recruiting there like you recruit at some of these other ACC schools is going to be tough. It fell after Bobby Crimmins left, and then maybe Paul Hewitt, he got to a championship game. So I think after maybe there, and it's a tough ordeal. They hired a great coach, Damian Stoudemire. You go out and look at how well he did, building up Pacific to where it was a challenger in the West Coast Conference, and then he was with the NBA for a few years. And that's where he played for the Toronto Raptors. They got a really solid person there. I love going to the Pac-12, the West Coast Conference, the Big West. Any number of coaches in those, like Mick Cronin's been on multiple times, Andy Enfield, any group right there. The coach Mike Hopkins of Washington. Then you go down, you got Russell Turner, who's a Virginian, actually, at UC Irvine in the Big West. A lot of people thought they were going to win the Big West this year. And then you can look across the boards at the WCC. I think we've had somebody at one time or the other from every school on there. I've had Randy Bennett at St. Mary's several times. But, I never get tired of it. I try to keep everybody involved in all 32 conferences. And that's why you won't see some of these guys but twice or three times a year. I just, and that's good for them, because you're not aggravating them, that much. And it makes a big difference.
You're certainly not one to sit still either, Ken. So, well.
So you mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and get into some of the coaching carousel stuff, because you mentioned Damon Stoudemire, and I think I think this is a real strong hire for Georgia Tech. You mentioned what he did at Pacific, bringing him, from the bottom of the league to, I think in 2019, I think they were like third place or something like that in the WCC. Then went to the NBA for a few years. I think getting that will really help them. We also had obviously Jim Boeheim retiring and Adrian Autry taking over, and we had Micah Shrewsbury, who did a really good job developing Penn State into a tournament team in just a couple of years over at Notre Dame. So I feel like this new crop of coaches is going to really raise the bar for the ACC in the coming years.
I do too, although Mike Bray's another guy I hated to see leaving at Notre Dame, but I think he'll land somewhere. I just don't think he's finished. He hadn't said he was retiring. He said he was changing, positions. And Micah Shrewsbury is a really good hire. He built Penn State from they looked like they were coming up a couple years ago, and then they had a fall, and they brought Micah Shrewsbury in there, and he got them to where they were playing really good ball. They had a chance to win the Big Ten tournament, and they lost to Purdue by 2. And I thought that the fact that Notre Dame was able to get him away there from Penn State, being at Penn State, there's a lot more you can do there. I thought that was a good move by the Fighting Irish.
Definitely. Some good. So I think the Big East is also another winner with this coaching carousel. Ed Cooley going from Providence to Georgetown. Kim English going in. I would classify that as kind of questionable right now because I don't know if he's done enough to really prove he deserves that job. But Rick Pitino going to St. John's is probably one of the biggest home run hires of this cycle. Where do you stand on those?
Oh yeah, I love Rick Pitino. He's one of my favorites in any sport, and I really thought Louisville made a really stupid move when they fired Rick Pitino, because what they were looking at was things that they had really no proof of, or things where he could have been pointed at. And just because he's a head coach, that doesn't mean you point at a guy if he didn't know. Rick Pitino probably knows. I would hate to say how much more about basketball he knows than I do, but I'm telling you, you put him on that court out there, you put him on a court and you let him watch a couple of trips of an opponent against his team, whoever the team is, and if he doesn't feel good about a game plan, he can go that early, that quick, and go forward. And I thought St. John's did an absolutely good job getting Rick Pitino. Again, a New Yorker who I think for him to be able to go to St. John's, it means a lot to him during his career. He says he's 70 years old and he feels like he's 50s.
Rodney Terry was named the full-time head coach at Texas on Monday after bringing him to the Elite Eight. Do you think he'll be able to be successful long-term?
Yeah, definitely. Rodney came on with me back when he was at Fresno State several times. So I'd gotten to know him then. Obviously the situation at Texas with Chris Beard and how that played out for whatever the reason was. It gave Rodney an opportunity, and his players loved him, and you could watch them until they were in a system, on offense and defense. And even if it was virtually the same system that Chris Beard had, he handled it really well, turning each of those forward and getting the Longhorns to the Elite Eight, which, they ran into a tough Miami fortress that last 10 minutes of that game. And they lost a 13-point lead, but it was Miami who took the game over.
I thought his post-game quotes yesterday after the game were, those are the kind of things that you love about a coach, just kind of like looking at things in perspective, talking about just what these things mean to him. I think something, you're going to remember this for, at their their weddings and stuff like that. And I think this was one of those things that just stands out as like how much he appreciated this team this year.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. They were easy, I think, to appreciate because they played really well and really hard together. And you could see them during games. There was an impactful approach to each of those guys to either be able to score or to get another person involved who could score. And the same with defense. They help each other out on defense immensely well.
Let me take a sidetrack here quickly. This is a topic that just keeps rearing its head. It won't go away. Conference realignment, the potential for things to change completely or even more, or maybe even the ACC to poof. What are your thoughts on realignment and how it may impact the ACC?
Unfortunately, it's not going to be anything done because of basketball. It's going to be done because of football. And I think Miami, Florida State, and Clemson, I mean, if the SEC is decided it's going to become like the NFL and have 4 or 5 different divisions inside of the conference, then maybe that's what they do. It's not going to help basketball any, because it's going to, I think it's going to take away several games you probably would rather see inside the league. For example, we like to play each other twice. Well, take for example Duke and North Carolina. They're a rivalry, okay, and you take those at football and you make 20 teams out of there. You're not going to see but one Duke versus North Carolina basketball game a year, because you can't. If you're going to have 20 teams in one conference due to football, you've got to do right for the other sports. I think maybe they don't think so, but you're not going to find any Duke or North Carolina fans in general that want one game. They're going to want 2, 3, 4.
No easy solutions here, is there? None at all.
No.
Let's slide out of that, because that's sort of this dark cloud over everything that's good, and it won't go away, unfortunately. But let's talk about the women. Women have, especially the ACC, has been just phenomenal this year, with getting so many teams into the tournament. But this has been an exciting NCAA women's tournament, and as we were talking earlier, you were watching South Carolina, and I'm sure you've got it just out of the corner of your eye there. So talk to us about what you're seeing with the women's tournament this year.
Yeah, they have a 13-point lead with 7 minutes to play.
Oof.
I think it's good. I think we're seeing the depth build in women's college basketball like we've had in the men's game for years. And that's good. Anytime you've got depth, anytime you've got 3 teams, for example, that are not in those Power 5 conferences, okay, you've got something to talk about. And the ladies' games like that, I think that I think South Carolina, they have been since the season started. I think they're the team to beat. But I really enjoyed watching Miami come forward this year inside the women's game. I thought they were really good. They lost last night, but when teams get down to 16, to Sweet 16 or an Elite 8 or whatever, and they lose, you got to go back and think about how many teams that were behind them to get into that point. So just subtracted by 363, that's how many Division I teams there are. The women's game gets better and better. I really wish there was some way that you could play women's basketball opposite guys basketball. I'd cover both of them.
Talk about a little bit about the success of Dawn Staley at South Carolina, and also somebody who has picked up the mantle and done very well at Notre Dame, Neil Ivey.
Yeah, Neil Ivey did a really good job this year, and they got knocked out. I was thinking, watching that game early, they might make it for a win there, but she did a really good job. Muffet McGraw is one of the best college basketball coaches, probably men or women that we've seen. Knowing basketball, it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. If you know the game, you know the game. Just ask Dawn Staley, Kim Mulkey, Muffet McGraw, and name some people you want to add in there. But I think that South Carolina, she's built a fortress down there. She has 2 national championships. They're undefeated right now. They're looking for a third. If they win out here, they'll be, I think, 6 games short of the record, which UConn had it at 51, the record for the most wins in a row, and that's what I'm hoping to see.
But since we're on the that yeah, we have the game is yet to tip off as we're recording, but Virginia Tech is going for a Final Four as well as they're coming up, and we followed their trajectory pretty close. I think it's pretty impressive to see what that program has become from in just a few short years. Competing for a Final Four.
Yeah, I really give the coach there a lot of credit because of how he's built this team, and he's made Virginia Tech women's basketball matter, across the boards, not just in the state of Virginia, maybe, or even in the ACC, but everybody knows who Virginia Tech is. That's how you pick up these athletes, these players, and that's how you win in any sport. So I take my hat off to him. He's done a heck of a job up there.
Ultimately, just to kind of backtrack, would you consider Dawn Staley just the best coach in basketball, men or women?
That would be hard. It would be hard to verify, but potentially yes. Potentially. But I mean, you would have to have her coaching and having games against several of these male coaches that are put high at the top of the ladder to even do that. But it's something that should be considered. A lot of it might have to do with what she does around the game, how she's built these teams, how they've not only when she builds them, how they flourish inside her system, how she teaches these girls to play. Obviously, she's got a really good staff aligned there, as you see much of this stuff outside the game.
Ultimately, who are going to win the national championships for both men and women?
Oh, good question. I'll go with South Carolina for women. I think they'll beat Iowa. Iowa's going to get to that point, and they're very good, but they're going to get to the point where they don't have as much experience in these situations as Dawn Staley and her Gamecocks do, and that matters. How much inside the men. I know everybody's wanting to pick UConn, but I'm not even going to pick UConn to beat Miami. I think Miami's got enough guards. Hawkins kid from UConn can carry you, and then Sonogo in that middle. But I think that Miami's got enough players. I think they've got a good 9 right there that will head on out and win that game. And then I like the San Diego State Florida Atlantic game. Seems like it might be a toss up. So I'm telling you, it's really hard for me to say right now who I'm going with in those men. I'm thinking, okay, you pick Miami over UConn, so pick Miami, but it doesn't work that way.
Man, Ken, it's been a long time, and we're glad you're back, and thank you for coming and joining us. Check out Ken at CollegeHoopsWatch.com and on the podcast, Marching to Madness, which is also on YouTube. He's got interviews with so many people on there. It staggers me sometimes because every time where I see you most often is LinkedIn. And it's like every time I'm opening my LinkedIn, it's like, there's Ken. And there's something new on there. So, man, with the passion of 1,000 people, basketball is all about Ken Cross. I tell you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I was a shooter back in the day. I should have been in the NBA picking up my. No, I'm just kidding. Hall of Fame, but no.
That's right. Well, you're in our Hall of Fame. We'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I enjoy coming on talking to you guys. And if when you need me, just ask. I mean, I'll talk NHL with you if you want to.
Sounds like a plan.
Once I get back into Tampa Bay, I'm going to pick up covering the Lightning again. I'm excited about that. I covered them their second championship, but the first one we had COVID, so it was very, very tight and it was way out of Tampa. But I covered the Hurricanes twice and 2 Stanley Cups, and then the Lightning in that one. I love the NHL.
And that's coming from a guy from Wiffle.
Wiffle ball.
I say that because I used to date somebody whose grandparents were from there. And in fact, she was from there originally too. And she used to always refer to it as Wiffle. So, who knows why? Ken Cross, thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, guys, and good luck, and enjoy all the hoops and everything you look at here this time.